Hi class, I hope you enjoyed that short video on sampling error and variation. So to finish up our 1.3 notes here, I believe this is where we left off. To define sampling error, the tendency, I'm going to type, it's just a little bit easier for me on my home computer here, for a statistic not to exactly match the population. So as we've been talking about, obviously when we are sampling a population, this is because we sometimes cannot realistically, survey um, every single person in the population. So we've been talking about different techniques for choosing our samples, trying to eliminate bias when we're doing sample by using random samples, all that good stuff. But regardless of the sampling method we use, there's going to be sampling error. This is just caused by the sampling process in general because of the differences and variations between people, between genders, and this can never really be eliminated completely. And just know our sample is just not a complete picture of the entire population. Non-sampling error, this is caused by factors not related to the sampling process. Some examples of this would be choosing a poor sampling method, maybe not the most appropriate for what you're trying to measure. And we did that Justin Timberlake activity and kind of discussed like, okay, between the systematic and the stratified, what would be our best sampling method here? So that could be some non-sampling errors by choosing a poor sampling method. Measurement error, maybe not collecting the data most appropriately or analyzing the data for what it was like and trying to measure, something like that could also create error that's not caused by the sampling process. Some other things I want to talk about here, which just relates to the activity you're going to do in a second here. Under coverage is when some members of a population cannot or are less likely to be included in a sample. I have a pretty good example for this. Say you're using the phone book, if you guys know what that is, to choose, doesn't matter what type of sample. Let's say we're doing a systematic and we're choosing every 10th member of the phone book for Grant County as to be a part of our sample. So that includes all of the landline numbers, which nowadays not a lot of people have landlines. So some members of our population would be less likely to be included in that sample if I chose to go to my phone book and randomly select from there. Non-response is exactly how it sounds when an individual is part of a sample but chooses not to respond or cannot be reached. One example of this would be, say you are chosen to be part of the sample and you are emailed the survey link and you simply just decide not to fill it out. That'd be an example of non-response error. Okay, and then response bias is a pattern of inaccurate results. So some examples of this would be maybe the surveyor or the one filling out the survey is lying about the results, or maybe they're actually being surveyed in person, and maybe the person that is surveying them is intimidating and they're afraid to truly admit what they think or feel about a situation. Or maybe just the question wording is very confusing and they can't quite grasp what it's asking and they maybe have to guess, and it's just not a very good type of question that's measuring what we were trying to measure in our survey. Okay, so you'll do an activity in a second that kind of goes over a few of those. So I have a couple example problems for us to go over here. So voluntary response or non-responsive. That's what we're going to decide with these two case scenarios. So the first one here says the New York Times asked for people to call in for a survey. 400 people call in with responses. So that is an example of a voluntary response. We talked about that earlier when you are choosing to be a part of the sample. So since they're asking people to call in, um, that's the voluntary piece of that. And we mentioned how this could be a little bit biased because people who are feel strongly about whatever they are surveying or maybe have more experience tend to feel the need to be a part of the survey. Our second one here says the New York Times randomly selected 1,000 households with landlines in the United States. They call all of these households, and 600 people hang up on them, and 400 respond. That would be an example of non response. Those 600 people that hung up on them. And so you can see the difference there between voluntary response and non response. I just kind of finished up this lesson with a couple other things that could go wrong to wrap up our like sampling unit. So we've talked about like bias samples, sample size issues. This kind of depends on the size of the population and what's more realistic. But overall, the larger of a sample usually leads to like better results because it's just more representative of the entire population. Self-funded or self-interest studies, misleading use of data, and then something correlation versus causation, which we'll kind of talk about that once we get into the more like math and statistics part of our data. So, all right, that about wraps it up. I kind of wanted to keep this short and sweet. I have a little activity for you guys to finish, and hopefully, I'll see you on Monday.